So welcome back to the Radiant Menopause podcast. My name is Dr. Gill Barham, and today I thought I would just share a little bit with you about my own story. When I was 28, I was sitting with my husband one Friday evening, about 10:30 at night, and I had my feet up on a little stool in front of me. We were just watching the television and holding hands, and the phone went. I'm not going to get that because I'm really tired. Will you get it? And as I heard him, he's sitting on the bottom of the step in the hallway, which is where we always answer the telephone. I could hear him just saying, oh, yeah, no, I'm really sorry. Oh, that's dreadful. I think, who is he talking to at this time of night? And as I walked up, he looked at me and I could see this horror and this sadness in his face. Yes, I'll tell her. Julie, Mum's died. You know, have you ever had those moments in your life when there's just, you know that life is never going to be the same again? That was one of those moments. And he says now, my husband says now, he'll never forget the sound that I made as I just kind of fell on the floor and shrieked, you know, in absolute grief and loss. And, you know, the first thing that occurred to me was, you know, is my baby going to be all right? You know, can this real sadness, can this shock cause me to lose my baby? Because it was such a shock. And I was, 6 months pregnant at the time. And we did actually call our GP. My husband was so worried about me. He called the GP and said, is there anything I need to do? You know, she's in this massive shock. Is she going to be okay? And my mother was only 56 when she died. Never saw my children, clearly. And that's had a massive impact on my life. And so when I was at this doctor's surgery at 51, with all of these symptoms, what I realised was that they were all the same symptoms pretty much that my mother had at 51. And that if I didn't do something about this, that I was likely to end up like her, potentially. I mean, I have to say that the only difference was that my mother was suicidal at times, and I never was, fortunately. But it gave me the impetus to say, this has to change. You know, there has to be a different way for me to live my life. There has to be some changes made where I can leave a better legacy than the one that my mum left me. And so that was when I began to kind of look at ways to improve my health. You know, having been a former nurse, I was very reluctant to take drugs. I certainly refused the antidepressants that were offered to me straight away. That was the first thing that was offered. As I said, I did accept the counselling, but I was really keen to look at other ways. And, you know, I'd been in this world where I was working with my Pilates teacher, who was studying functional nutrition herself at the time, with this team of people that had seen my decline and were trying to help me, but I wasn't listening. You know, I was Superwoman. Why did I need any help from anybody else? And so I began to listen. That was the moment. And I think, you know, what's interesting is that I'm recording this now, what is it, 30th of June, we're 14 weeks into COVID, that this period of time has helped us all to really sit up and listen and become more aware of our bodies and our mortality and our own responsibility for taking care of ourselves. You know, and this was something that was really put in my face, you know, 8 years ago. And so that's when I started looking more deeply into food as medicine and looking and studying functional nutrition and understanding how our bodies work and how we can use extra supplementation to fill the gaps. Because, you know, what I understood was, and what I began to understand was that, you know, there are two things that happen for us in this 21st century. One is that we're a nation that's overfed and undernourished. So in other words, we've got access to lots of food, but most of it is very nutrient poor. And we also live these incredibly stressful lifestyles. And one of my favourite episodes coming up for you is with a fellow functional nutritionist called Sheppard. and she's actually specialises in the menopause, and she does look after men as well, but her speciality is menopause, like me. And so we have some really interesting conversations coming up that will give you her perspective, and one that I agree with, on how food and nutrition is the foundation of anything that you need to do as a midlife woman. Whatever you decide to do outside of natural solutions and natural remedies, and whether or not you take HRT, whether you go for extra support. And believe me, I've tried all of it. I went into the menopause at 39. That was my first off flush. I had a hysterectomy at 45 for a very large ovarian cyst. I kept my ovaries, but this threw me quicker into the menopause. But by then, the doctors scanned me and said, well, there's very little going on in your ovaries anyway. So, it was fairly early for me. So, I've been probably, it's been 20 years since the first symptom now, because I'm now 59. So believe me, I have enjoyed trying everything, but it's really interesting that so many people do this, whether or not you go down the kind of herbal route. So there's lots of people who benefit from things like sage supplements, or red clover, or black cohosh is very popular. Jury's a bit out on that. Or one of the ones that I actually used is an old-fashioned type of hops, which I did find really helpful, and do find really helpful, and so do some of my clients. And so some of these have lots of value, and there is also a placebo type effect for some of those as well. If you believe you're taking something that is helping you, then it will help you. That's how the body works. But there is lots of evidence to say that some of these nutrients can help you, but not everybody, and it's about choosing what's right for you, maybe experimenting a bit. But there are also energy therapies that are really good for some women as well, and I've tried them all. Shiatsu is one of my absolute favorites. Shiatsu therapies, not the massage, but the actual shiatsu therapy, is just the most glorious experience. Reiki, homeopathy. So, despite what you may have read, homeopathy is a really powerful way. I think homeopathy was one of the very first things I tried. I went to a naturopath when I was 19. So that's 40 years ago. It's very unusual, that it wasn't so well known then. I was singing at the time, and I had some throat problems, and my singing teacher sent me to a homeopath in London, in Harley Street. So I've been using this stuff for a long time, and I know its effectiveness. I used homeopathy when I was suffering with glandular fever, when my first daughter was 18 months old. And, there's nothing you can do medically from a drug perspective with glandular fever. It's a virus that gets in, and so there's nothing that you can have. But I had some homeopathy at that point, which kind of sped up the process, so I was up and out of it the other side. And this is what functional nutrition does. This is the way that I work now. It's about building health rather than treating symptoms. It's about the cold is the cure. Vomiting, if you eat food that disagrees with you, you vomit it. Well, that's what we need to happen. It comes out the other end because it's expelling. The body is doing what it's supposed to do. And of course, what we tend to do is medicate to stop the symptom, when actually sometimes the symptom is actually the cure, if that makes sense to you. So, there are things that I've tried. Reiki is wonderful, Reiki healing, energy healing, using things like the energy alignment method, which is, I'm really keen on that. If you've never heard of that, then you can Google Yvette Taylor. Acupuncture, I've got some really good friends that are acupuncturists, and particularly working in the women's hormone space, improving fertility. And certainly there are interviews with Sally Varley, who's a fertility expert, and Emma Guy, who is a menopause expert, menopause godmother. We're going to be exploring those kind of Chinese medicines as well. I actually don't like acupuncture, I have to put it out there. They still love me, but I just don't like acupuncture. But there's also things from the emotional point of view as well. So if we're looking at natural solutions, it has to be a holistic approach, the more holistic methods you can bring in, the better, with nutrition as the foundation. That's always, whether you are using natural methods or whether you're using HRT or a combination of the two. Nutrition is at the root of it. But there is also a big mindset piece. And so this was the bit that I was missing, understanding that the way that I thought, my emotions, the kind of soul, my soul, the way that I thought about myself was affecting my symptoms. Because you'll hear me refer to this, that I really hated myself. And I would say to people, I feel like my body's letting me down, because I was having such extraordinary symptoms. I've effectively had hot flashes for 13 years, every day. When they started at 39, that was a one-off. But by the time I was post-operation, post-hysterectomy, they came every day. And at their very worst, probably when I was 50, I was having them every night, half an hour a night, every half an hour. I remember being in France going skiing, and I don't know how I made the holiday, really. But I think what was going on at the time, in retrospect, was that was the kind of build up of this very stressful period that I was experiencing at work. And stress will always make all of those symptoms worse. So finding ways to de-stress, and that's why there's a mini series as part of Radiant Menopause called Stress and the Midlife Woman, which you can go back, and they're just mini little menopauses, maybe as little as 5 minutes long up to 10 minutes long, something like that, where I talk about stress and the effects of us as midlife women. So tapping into that side of me has been the major change in the last 2 or 3 years. Being around people that are in the more conscious awakening space, in the spiritual space. I interviewed Rachel Elnor, so that you can listen to her, who is an ex-entrepreneur. She was the creator of Red Letter Days, the experience, you go, ballooning or whatever it was. A real powerful woman who went from, she was the first female dragon on Dragon's Den. She did the first 2 series. Very masculine, in this powerful energy, who has gone from dragon to Dharma, who is now still in the business world, but comes at it from a much more feminine energy point of view, and has had this massive journey over the last 30 years, really. It's taken her to come to the point where she is, and her journey, she describes her journey still continues with this kind of spiritual growth. And she spends a lot of her time looking at trauma healing and shamanic practices and all that kind of thing. Really fascinating interview, you need to listen to it. And so that, for me, along with other people that I've been working with, has helped me to open up into this world, into experimenting and tapping into meditations, to things like emotional freedom techniques, tapping into not only doing Pilates, but starting yoga. I'd convinced myself that I could never do yoga. It was just a story I was telling myself. We all tell each other stories. We've all got excuses. Oh, I can't do yoga because I'm not flexible enough. I'll stick with my Pilates. I teach Pilates, so I know what I'm doing. And it's basically the same. No, it isn't. That was a story I was telling myself. Because what yoga gives me is a very different thing to what Pilates gives me. And being around these conscious leaders, these spiritual leaders, and particularly during COVID, it's been more and more important for me to have these connections with like-minded souls. And the more I connect with them, the more other of those like-minded souls are drawn to me too. So that my world has become much more fulfilled with people that are thinking and behaving and being in the same space that I aspire to. And that in turn has helped me to develop not only myself, but also what I want to do. And what I want to do is to help women like you enjoy a radiant menopause. Rather than all of the forums that I see, and women, laying their hearts out, saying how unhappy they are and how lost they are and how their life has changed from colour to black and white, and how they feel that their life has no purpose and no meaning, and like me, that their body's letting them down, and all of those very sad emotional and physical things that are going on. But it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be like that. And it's finding whatever is right for you, but more importantly, knowing that you don't have to do it on your own. Finding the people that can help you, that have perhaps trodden your path, that have got the experience. Claire, that I was talking to this morning, is 66. She was one in 1,000 women that experience menopause in their 30s. 1 in 100 will experience it in their 20s. So she had a relatively, what's classed as an early menopause. So she's had 36 years worth. I've had 20 years worth. You've got great menopause advocates in the medical world, like Dr. Louise Newson, for example, who is championing the cause for doctors to be better educated, because most of them are uneducated about the menopause, and most of them are uninterested in the menopause, which is ridiculous when it affects half of the population. And we're going to talk about that in other episodes as well. So my plea to you is about connecting with people that can support you through this. This is a long time. If you start your perimenopausal, which is normal, in your 40s, hit menopause sometime in your 50s, and then you are thereafter post-menopausal. This just doesn't go away. Some of the symptoms will subside, some of them will go away completely, and some of them, other ones, will come as you get older, in the same way that symptoms will arrive just because you are older. So we have to inform and educate ourselves about how to protect ourselves, particularly from the common things that affect us as we have this deficiency in estrogen, like osteoporosis, like heart disease, like diabetes. We are much more likely, and dementia, we are much more likely to develop those post-menopausally, because estrogen is protective for us before we actually hit the last day of our periods. So it's about understanding that this isn't, HRT, for example, is just not a quick fix to deal with symptoms. And I used to believe, because I was told, that it would just delay the onset of menopause. No, that's not true at all. What we're doing here is that we are replacing something that is lost. So whether you do that in whatever way you do that, whether it's through bioidentical or body identical hormones, whatever way you choose, or whether or not you've got more natural methods to do that, like the HOPS option that I was talking to you about, whichever's right for you. But actually, there's an awful lot of misinformation. There are more studies about, for example, the positive effects of HRT, thousands more than there are about the negative ones. But it's the negative ones that always get in the press, because that's what sells newspapers. Nobody's going to buy a newspaper that says, ooh, taking transdermal HRT is actually, or particularly estrogen, if you don't have a womb, actually protects you from breast cancer. There are less incidents than there are more. Nobody's going to tell you that, because it doesn't sell anything. And the fact that you are 10 times more likely to develop breast cancer if you're overweight than if you do a low dose HRT. That's not news either, is it? It's not something that sells newspapers. So it's about keeping it into perspective and creating this kind of life for yourself. If you've got the opportunity as a midlife woman to change some things, to get a better work-life balance, if you can. And I know that's difficult, because particularly as we're having children later, it means that for some of you that are perimenopausal, you are dealing with young children and elderly parents and work and all the rest of it. Whereas 50 years ago, of course, children potentially would have left home by then. Your parents wouldn't be alive. 100 years ago, things have changed for us, definitely. But it's about reevaluating, is this what I want to do? Is this what I need to do? What boundaries am I going to put up around me? And what self-care practices can I put into place to support me whilst I'm trying to be Superwoman? So whether that's food, whether it's supplements, whether it's getting regular therapies. Go and treat yourself. Yes, you can have a facial, but why don't you have a massage or a shiatsu therapy? That's going to align you and balance you. Find ways that you can reduce your stress. Take some exercise. Basic stuff, nothing that you don't know about, but most of us find difficult to put into practice because we are just in this treadmill of looking after everybody else's needs before us. So we're going to be investigating some of these therapies, and as I say, I've already recorded the nutrition one with Claire Sheppard. So we're going to be looking at some of these other methods, some of the stress busting methods I'm going to introduce you to. I'll be getting those specialists on to talk about that, and to talk about also things like how your past experiences could potentially be impacting your menopausal life as you are now, or your midlife. So lots to talk about, and I will see you on the next podcast, or you will hear me on the next podcast. Please do like and share and subscribe. If you could subscribe and download this podcast, that's great, because it means that more people will see it. And if you believe that it's more important that women, it is important that women understand the menopause, then we can all do our bit by sharing podcasts like mine. There are others out there, so that we can work together as women, as sisters, to make this no longer the elephant in the room. I'll see you next time.